All right, everyone. This video or this section is about people who are using Adobe Photoshop. So if you're not planning on using Adobe Photoshop, please go have it shared, right? Yeah, please make sure you're in the Photopea section and not in the Photoshop section. Okay. All right. For those of you using Adobe Photoshop, you're in the right place as your raster editing tool. Make sure you guys have the files. Okay. This is the first time I've talked about or I've given you a zip file to work from. Let me explain how that works if you've not ever dealt with a zip file before. The way it works is you would click where it says download the exercises. This will download what's called a zip file. A zip file is a compression file. What it essentially does is it keeps multiple files within one. Okay. The way to think of it is, and this is why it's called zip, is think of it like a suitcase. Okay. When you have a suitcase, you unzip your suitcase, right? And you can fill it full of, clothes and all sorts of stuff that you would put on, when you go on vacation. And then you zip it up and it's one suitcase, right? Or one piece of luggage. That's kind of the idea with a zip file. There are times in working with computers that you're going to want to deal or have access to multiple files, but rather than having to send each file individually, it would be nice if there was just one sort of main file that stored everything, and that's what a zip file is, okay? Or that's what a compression file is. We are going to be using the zip format, okay? Both Mac and PC should be able to deal with the zip format. The way it would work is it depends on your operating system how you unzip it. So for instance, if you have a Mac and you have a zip file, you can tell it's a zip file, one, because it has a little zipper here, and two, because it literally ends in the extension .zip. All you really have to do is just literally double click on it. One, two, and that should unzip it automatically for you. If you're on Windows, it's still easy. It's just one extra step. What you would do, I can't show you at the moment, but I'll have a video about this. What you would do is right click. There would be an option here that says extract or extract all. That is the command that to tell it to uncompress a zip file. You would tell it where you want to put your files. I recommend putting them on your desktop or something along those lines so they're easy to find, and then you'd have access there. One thing you have to understand is if you're a Windows user, technically you're allowed to open up zip files, but they're not technically unzipped. This is not something that's possible on a Mac, but it is possible on a Windows. You want to make sure you unzip the folder. The reason why is if you don't actually unzip it, but instead you just open it, the files are still considered compressed. And even though you can view them in a program like Photoshop or Illustrator or whatever the file format is, you won't be able to save or work with them. Okay, so it's important that you actually extract them if you're on a Windows. On a Mac, there is no way to work with a file that isn't already extracted. That's not an option. There are going to be times you might want to submit me a zip compression file, meaning a file or a file that has multiple files inside of it. So let's just say for the sake of argument, you wanted to submit me this folder, which actually has many files inside of it. The way you could do this is once again, how you compress it into a zip file depends on whether it's a Mac or a PC. On a Mac, you literally can just right click and choose compress, and whatever the name of the folder is, it would compress it into a zip file. If you're working with Windows, you would right click. There'd be an option that says compress or send to zip or something along those lines, and then that would compress it into a zip file. Okay. So a little just understanding the basics of zip files. At the beginning they're kind of weird, but the more we use them, I'm sure they will become not too hard to deal with or understand. So we're dealing with Adobe Photoshop as our raster editing tool. And I just want to kind of go over the user interface real quick. All right, so let's start a little introduction here. So uh, up here, whoops. These are our menus. Okay. Menus have commands that we may want to access. Things like, file new, new file, save as, print, that kind of stuff. Um, Under edit, there's things like copy, paste, undo, redo. These are the kind of things you would see in any kind of standard, program like Microsoft Word or whatever. Image has to do with the image properties itself. Layers have to do with layer properties that we're not going to get too deep into. We're going to talk more about selection in the next module, so on and so on. All right. Over here, this is our toolbar. This is where our tools are. Okay. Each tool we have, we're not going to get like super deep because we're really only spending about 2 days, which is not very much when you're talking about a raster editing program as complex as Photoshop. But, there are tools here. These tools will let us do certain things like move elements or select elements. I'm not going to get into it in this class, but you could like eventually use them to draw and do other things. So you should think of a toolbar like the way a carpenter or a metalsmith person might have different tools. Think of it as like if you're a woodworker, you have like a hammer and a screwdriver and a table saw and so on and so on. Each tool has its own purpose of why you have it and when you would use it. And so each one of these tools is like, okay, when would we use, one of these tools or something like that? This is our composition. So whatever you're doing, it's like eventually this is your composition. Whatever you see here is that's what's going to be exported from the program. So if you were to print this, or you were to bring it into another graphic design program like Adobe After Effects or something like that, it's like this is what your composition would look like. And then finally over here, whoa, let's try that again. Over here, we got panels. Panels provide additional information that we can take advantage of. This information gives us more information about the composition as a whole. It could be navigating, text, colors, all sorts of good stuff. We're not going to, like I said, we only got 2 days here, so I'm not going to get super deep into most of this. But, if you want to learn more about the power of Photoshop and the panels and all that, I would strongly recommend I think it's Digital Media 6A, 6, which is the Adobe Photoshop course. They would go much more in depth in this than I'm going to. But I'm going to give you guys a good general overview since we are going to deal with raster graphics in motion design. All right, let's talk about opening up a file into Photoshop. Like the name sounds like, Photoshop, it is a program that deals with digital photos. Okay, so Photoshop can really handle any standard digital file. That includes things like JPEGs, PNGs, WebPs, GIFs, TIFFs. These are all raster, basic, very common digital image formats that it can work with. It can also work with other ones that I'm not going to talk about that you probably never heard of, but are, image formats it could work with. The stand, what's the word I'm looking for? The native format of this program of Adobe Photoshop is the Photoshop document or the PSD. PSD. So when you work inside Photoshop, I really strongly recommend that you so what I'm going to do is go to Photoshop and open up the files for today. And you'll notice under image formats that I don't seem to have access. So in some image formats, you might see that there's a text document here. This text document this is it's not, I'm not able to open it up or select it. And the same for the Excel file here. The reason why is that Photoshop only really deals with photograph information. It doesn't deal with non-photograph information. So what that really means is that I can't, I don't get access to, I have to only deal with image formats. So something like a GIF or a PNG or something along those lines, I'm able to access, all right, and work with, whereas um, I'm not able to do that with other formats. All right. So we talked about importing different types of files. Let's talk about navigation, meaning how to navigate through an existing document. So I'm going to open up exercise one here. So I have this photo and I want to blow it up, or I want to zoom in on it, so I get a better sense of what's going on in my composition. So what I'm going to do is grab the zoom tool, which I have right here. And this is a little magnifying glass, and this allows me to magnify or zoom into my project. So if I click, 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 I zoom in. If I hold down the Option or the Alt key, you can see how that turns from a positive into a negative, and that allows me to zoom out. Another way to do this is if I go up here in my tool options, I could use the demagnifying tool or the negative that would allow me to zoom in, and then the Option key would do the reverse and allow me to zoom in as such. We can also use keyboard shortcuts. The keyboard shortcut to zoom in and out would be Command plus and Command minus to zoom out. Okay. If I'm zoomed in above 100%, you'll notice that I need to be able to pan or move around my scene. There's a couple ways we could do that. We could use the sliders here on the right and on the bottom to pan around my document. Another way to do this would be using the hand tool. I can click and move around my document. Okay. Keyboard shortcut to pan around your document would be the space bar. So if I hold down space bar, I can click and drag and move around my document as such. Okay. There's also a panel that we can actually use. It's not usually open by default, but it's called the Navigator panel. And the way I'm going to access this is by going to Window and then Navigator. And then I can click on this slider here. So the Navigator is kind of a blend between both the zoom tool and the hand tool. So if I click to the right, I zoom in, or I blow this up. If I click to the left, I zoom out. Okay. If I'm zoomed in, you notice I get this little red square or rectangle here. That is my viewfinder that shows me what I currently see within here. I can click and move it to pan around my document. Okay. So be able to, unzip the files and be able to, move around the document. Okay. Before I go, let's talk about some basic things we can do to our composition as a whole. So, you can find any image and bring it in. So let's use a site like maybe Pexels, and I'm going to come in here. Let's type in cute kitty because we always love a good cute kitty. Whoa, that kitty's kind of. How about this one? Oops, there we go. I don't know what format this is, but what we're going to do is go to free download, choose sizes. Let's choose the small one. And then what I'm going to do is go to File, Open, and find that image file. It's a JPEG, and bring it in. There you go. I can zoom in by using Command plus or Command minus to zoom out, or I could use the navigator here to kind of quickly zoom in, zoom out to my document. All right, let's say you bring in a document and you want to change the document. So like right now it's like, okay, I have this, but I really want it like this. What I'm trying to do here is rotate your entire composition or your entire image. You can do that easily in Photoshop by going to Edit and go under bibbidi bobbidi boom. Sorry, under Image and go under Image Rotation. And I'm going to go 90 degrees clockwise, which means it's going to go this way. There's my image. Okay. I could have also gone 90 degrees counterclockwise, which means going like this. I can even flip it a full half turn or 180. All right. So keep in mind that, we rotate 0 degrees, 90 degrees, 180 degrees, 270. Okay. That allows me to rotate all the way around. In addition, I could do a flip. And what a flip would do is the left side becomes the right side, and the right side becomes the left side. The way to think of it is like, have you ever seen traditional film, like actual acetate film, and there's like a negative on it, taking that negative and like flipping it upside down, essentially. Okay. We can do that relatively easy in Photoshop by going to Image and then going under Image Rotation and doing a flip horizontal or flip vertical. Flip horizontal means left becomes right, right becomes left, as such. Ooh, creepy, right? Or I could also do flip vertical where bottom becomes top and top becomes bottom, as such. Okay? Now, the last thing I want to talk about here is the concept of duplicating, but also as a larger kind of concept, talking about this in the terms of working non-destructively. Okay. Working non-destructively, like it sounds like, means not changing or deleting content if we don't need to. Okay. So, in other words, like if some of the things I did here, like rotating this or flipping it or whatever, even a small change, it changes the content of what you're working with. And if I were to use save, it's like I'm replacing the old content with the new content, and I'm losing the original content. You know what I mean? So a lot of times we don't want to do that. So what we do, or one suggestion I would have, is working non-destructively, which are techniques to not, delete content or destroy content if you don't have to. One of those is like, well, when you have an image, you could actually duplicate the image. If I go to image and then duplicate, this makes a copy or, of this image. So I'll just call this sea lion duplicate. I'm now working with the duplicate. This is the original. And if I do something like maybe, I don't know, rotate it and then save, I did save it. I saved it as a PSD because I want to keep this as a Photoshop document, but I still have the original. So if for whatever reason, I need to go back to the original file, that is still an option for me and I still can have it. Okay. So usually when you work, I really strongly recommend that you don't delete content unless you absolutely have to. Instead, find non-destructive ways of working. Okay.